settle for less or settle for the best? Sometimes one can lead to the other. Welcome back to the Sunshine State Rails. And following a visit to the Tampa area to find out that there was not a thing running around this morning, our wheels turned south into the Bone Valley, through rural Tampa, across the Brewster sub at Mosaic, New Wales, then turning south onto State Road 37. State Road 37 would then take us through Aiken, Bradley Junction, and our destination would eventually be Ag Rock. Ag Rock is the interchange point between CSX and Mosaic for Mosaic's Four Corners Phosphate mine, and that is where we would go to find CSX train K339, which would be our target for today. We'd finally arrive at Mosaic Ag Rock just before 11 a.m. We're on the CSX Brewster subdivision at milepost SVC 853, and I'd waste no time in getting the drone up to get a look at Ag Rock Yard, as the power for K339 wasn't in sight, so I was going to find it by the air. As I mentioned, Ag Rock is the interchange point between CSX and Mosaic, so multiple train sets of Wetrock Gons will be sitting in this yard at one time. And there was about to be another one, as making it down to the west end of the yard, I'd stumble upon a Mosaic job bringing over a loaded train of wet rock hoppers from the Four Corners mine. This wouldn't be the train that 339 would haul back north today, but it was a train that they were pulling in fresh from the mine. So even though we couldn't get physically up close, it was something interesting to see as they pull through Ag Rock. Two Jeep 38-2s in Mosaic's paint job were hauling this train in. Needless to say, a first for me. Now as for the CSX side of this operation, K339 is reportedly a daily job that goes on duty each morning in East Tampa, which is a phosphate processing plant over in Riverview, Florida, on the banks of the Alifia River on the Palmetto subdivision, which we're fairly familiar with. They'll run either engines light or bring an empty consist down here to Ag Rock, and then normally pick up a loaded train and bring it back to the plant, as this is one version of what happens down here on a daily basis here in the Bone Valley. Wet rock and dry rock are the two most common terms you'll hear for phosphate. We'll get more into wet rock and dry rock here in just a few minutes, but as for us, our goal today would be to chase K339 with their loaded train from the yard here at Ag Rock back to East Tampa. And by pulling their two General Electric AC 4400 motors back to the west end of the yard, that journey would soon commence.
Yeah, we here at Ag Rock, ready to depart.
Alright, so what you got, 12 in the lead there?
That's right, got that 12.
Alright, EC1 number 91751, 91751. 030622, SVC 851.2, K33906, 12, divine copy. Triple line 1, track 1 direction, South Ag Rock Yard limit on the main. SAS South End Valrico on the main. Over.
The power for today's K339 would be number 12 and number 69, both being identical AC 4400 models in the Yellow Nose 3 paint scheme, with number 12 sporting a small Spirit of Louisville decal on the front of the nose. That radio message that you heard as K339 was pulling out was his EC1 authority, and EC1 authorities are given to trains that have to pass through dark territory. EC1 authorities are pieces of track that trains are being given permission to use because it's non-signaled and dispatchers can't control anything within it. Which is where, as we begin to slowly pace K339 up Fort Greene Road, I'll show you his full routing. He's currently beginning his trip northward out of Ag Rock, following the Brewster subdivision, which will take him up to Bradley Junction, where he will stay on the Brewster sub by turning to the northwest, continuing up past New Wales up to Edison, where he'll turn further to the northwest onto the Valrico subdivision, which will then take him up to Valrico. And his EC1 authority was up to South End Valrico because that is where dispatcher-controlled territory begins again, so that's as far as the EC1 authority needs to be. Then in signaled territory, he'll continue west on the S line into Tampa, bypassing Yeoman Yard, then turning south onto the Tampa Terminal subdivision, which will then take him down to the East Tampa Phosphate Processing Facility on the banks of the Alifia River. Fort Greene Road crosses over the Brewster sub a number of times, so about a mile up the line is where we would unintentionally get our first shot. K339 is Wetrock loads bound for the river shores in East Tampa. Now, what is Wetrock? There's wet rock and dry rock. Frankly, those two are slang terms for phosphate in its two different forms. Wet rock, like here on K339, is pretty much just what it sounds like. It's still wet, with the exception of some washing and slurification. It's pretty much exactly what they pulled out of the ground only X amount of time ago. This is the stuff that gets shipped by rail to processing plants such as the one in East Tampa, where it's processed into dry rock phosphate. The other term, which is finished phosphate, also known as diammonium phosphate fertilizer, or DAP fertilizer for short. If you're really curious about knowing which BV train is hauling what, simply look at the tops of the cars. If the cars are open top and the loads are visible, it's likely wet rock phosphate that can deal with the weather conditions. On the other hand, if the cars are covered like flip-top hoppers or jumbo covered hoppers, the loads are likely DAP fertilizer, which is ruined if gotten wet. For the third consecutive time now, Fort Greene Road crosses over the Brewster sub from one side to the other, but after that crossing, we then come into the town of Bradley Junction. Yes, the town of Bradley Junction. And if that house was on a little bit nicer piece of land, I wouldn't mind living there. The town of Bradley Junction, clearly named after the railroad's name of this place, hosts nothing more than a gas station and a few dozen homes, but it does have one of the busiest places in the Bone Valley for rail fanning, and K339 was about to be the next visitor, so we'd head down one of those neighborhood backstreet roads and set up for K339 rounding the south leg of the Bradley Y. Zooming in on the bottom hopper doors of 339 as he rounds Bradley, you can see why the stuff he's pulling is called wet rock. It's literally dripping wet. Moving up to the road at the crossing of State Road 37, a couple of you on my last video, specifically Richard, commented on the dip in the tracks here at this crossing. Here you can really see it in action.
Detector, milepost 843.4, no defect. Repeat, no defect. Detector out.
And that's a lot of traffic. And this guy's probably going to where we're going next. Which was right up the line to the crossing of Pinecrest Road within the vicinity of the New Wales phosphate processing plant. It should come as no surprise that sulfur, one of the key ingredients of making the phosphate fertilizer, is brought in by trucks as well as rail, but Wetrock is strictly rail, and K339 had a trainload of it coming north.
339.
Alright, you got each train ID K339. CSX
91751, K339 0612, line report north, SBC 840.0 on the main, 1250 SCM.
Across Pinecrest Road, 339 would begin to slow his speed as he was about to reach the next turning point, Edison. Via the help of radio remote switches, he'd be turning himself further to the northwest, from the Brewster sub now onto the Valrico sub, which would take him up to Valrico. The track veering off to the left is also the Valrico sub, which continues off toward Mulberry, IMC, Bartow, Fort Meade, and ultimately a dead end in the dirt at Bowling Green. K339 can stretch his train out through the strawberry fields of Edison as he creeps up onto the Valrico sub, and the palm trees and open fields would come as a welcome sight here, because once he gets past Valrico, he's in an all-urban environment, which means traffic and traffic lights.
339.
I got you one number 91751, train ID K33906. Get the CSX 12. Employee update from Divine reporting north direction of North Wetrock Yard, limits on the main track.
91751, K339 S612, Divine report north, North Welcome Yard, limit on the main, 1312 SCM.
Alright, 1312 SCM.
Alright, I'll be ready for you at Valrico. You're going to lay it up on the bypass, so...
Alright, wait up on the bypass. Alright, here we come.
Alright, yes.
Now at 1:30 p.m. we're at Valrico Junction. A straight shot from Edison to Valrico allowed us to leapfrog the train to here, and this is where he will re-enter dispatcher controllable territory, by coming off the Valrico subdivision at milepost SZ0 onto the Yeoman subdivision, better known as the S-line at milepost S832.5. This is also technically the south end of the Valrico siding, hence why it's called South End Valrico. But it's also the junction where the Valrico subdivision begins to the south.
CSX detector milepost 2.3. No defects. Repeat, no defects. Total axle 348. Detector out.
The train was now making the straight shot west towards Tampa, but the road crossing of Valrico Road right in front of us, as you may be able to tell, is very, very busy. So getting out of the spot we were at was one thing, but then hopping onto State Road 60 West towards I-75, we hit a whole different issue. Tampa, Florida traffic. This is just about what the road looked like at every other intersection for the 9.5 miles to Yeoman. Bumper to bumper cars at 1:45 p.m. on a Sunday afternoon. I'm glad I don't have to drive to work every day in this. I had almost figured that we were definitely losing the train beyond this point, as he only had so far to go until Tampa and ultimately the Palmetto Sub. But miraculously, as we make it over to Tampa crossing the bypass canal, we see his bottom end slowing across the river. Though this wouldn't end out to be the grace of luck that I thought it would be.
Answer 339.
And this is where the railroad makes you question everything. Pulled up in here with the train's bottom end on the bypass canal. There's what, like a mile of distance between there and here? It's been an hour and a half, no train of any kind, anywhere, from any direction, so as of 3:15, can we get a train, please?
I suppose, if you're willing to wait another 3.5 hours, as apparently something I missed in a dispatch conversation back there at Edison noted that K339 would be tying it up on the bypass, presumably for a crew change, although I don't know why they needed to get one, as I believe they had plenty of their 12-hour shift left. But anyhow, it's after 6 p.m. now and we're parked beneath the Orient Road overpass at Yeoman Yard, and K339 sits on the bypass in the background, as train 0728 also gets their consist handed to them to take north up the Brooksville sub tonight. Then the Jeep 40-3 that handed the train over would switch back into the yard. Maybe y'all didn't notice it as quick as I did there, but as that Jeep cleared the camera angle, I realized that K339 was finally moving. I had gotten no heads up as to his takeoff, so as I realized this, I packed it all up as quick as I could and moved down to TS, the beginning of the Tampa Terminal subdivision off the Yeoman bypass. And as you may be able to tell here, all of the old US&S color lights have been replaced. But K339 was now our evening focus. With this new crew, they had switched the ID to K340, and they only had 6 more miles to go before the East Tampa processing plant. And finally, after all this time, it would be just before the sun dipped below the horizon that the train would begin the journey south for the final portion. A quick interesting point is why the train is coming around the corner so slowly, even though they have a clear signal. This is because they're not coming straight around the bypass where they may have been coming off of a clear signal at YN. Because this is a new crew beginning the journey from right around the corner where no signals were visible, they have to inch the train slowly enough around the corner to where they can see the signal and be able to stop in the case that it's not a clear signal or an aspect that they can pass. However, once they've rounded and confirmed that the signal is passable and clear, they can notch the train right up to this region's track speed, 35 miles per hour. unexpected layover on the Yeoman bypass will have turned this into almost an 8-hour journey from Ag Rock to East Tampa, but finally, just after 7 o'clock p.m., K339, now K340, a train load of Wetrock phosphate, would finally diverge off the main line at East Tampa, crossing US 41 and into the interchange yard of Mosaic, East Tampa. K340 would have to line a number of switches to get himself through the yard to the other end, but we're going to skip all of that and jump over here. Here's a decently large view of the Mosaic East Tampa facility. Within this processing plant, the wet rock loads will be brought in, unloaded, processed into dry rock phosphate or diammonium fertilizer, and whatever finished products are produced here will be loaded aboard ships that dock here upon the Alifia River. That allows for overseas exports. The Mosaic Yard here per se, parallel to US 41, is similar to the yard over at Ag Rock. None of the transloading operations happen here, but this is more like an interchange yard between CSX and Mosaic. Mosaic has their own small switcher for this facility that will come up and bring the cars they need to be unloaded into the facility for those needs. CSX's only job is to bring in and sort the cars in this yard here, which is what we'd watch them do as we'd end off the evening here in Gibsonton, Florida. Number 12 and 69, no matter how iconic the pair, provided us with quite the interesting day out in South Central Florida, and one that I am very happy to say I've completed. I'm really enjoying these Bone Valley outings especially, so definitely expect more of them upcoming soon. But for us, that concludes one of the Bone Valley's full operations. Wet rock loads from the Four Corners mine to the East Tampa phosphate processing plant. Thanks for joining me upon the high iron today, or tonight, and at some point, somewhere within our familiar state, I'll see you out there somewhere upon the Sunshine State Rails.